It looks like we're ready for round number 2.
And I need to set ready.
How dare you? But yeah, and again, I feel like in lieu of those early early knobs, I feel like, I mean, obviously Stevebud didn't know that a Razorback was already on the way, but he could have more or less assumed that's kind of what Riku goes for, especially when he's got a good hold on the center of the map. Being able to heal and then being able to auto-reinforce just means that Space Marines aren't leaving the field. But I think he could have gone for that truck and maybe put a little more pressure on the power farm. Of course, Riku may have been able to eventually stop it, but that would have pulled the pressure off his own power farm, if nothing else, for the time being. And maybe it allowed him to get back into the tech game a little easier.
I'm wondering, I'm starting to think of wondering what Stevebud should do differently this time. I think the Stormboy and Slugga builds may have been a little problematic for him against double shotguns, just trying to get those Stormboys and Sluggas in, and I think for the most part they're going to be bleeding a lot. I mean, there are times when he came very close to wiping squads, taking out some models, but still, just against double shotguns, it's going to be very difficult to keep those two squads on their feet without bleeding a hell of a lot, especially the Stormboys.
Yeah, the Stormboys are so expensive to reinforce, and I feel like, you know, you need to use those big shooters to scare off the scouts, and the way Riku was playing, you know, on Calderas he doesn't have to spread out too much, so he was able to just hang out in a pile, make sure those scouts were always nearby and not getting focused down by shooter boys. So if he can force those scouts off, I mean, obviously all he'd have to do at that point is take out the ASMs. He was also blobbing up for those merciless strikes pretty easily. Like, he could probably even stand to maybe do a little juke, fake out with the ASMs, engage them for a second, and then hop on the scouts. Make sure that merciless strike doesn't deal heavy damage, and then return to focus on the assault marines after that's been burned. Right now we're seeing the big shooters start to take control of the center, pushed off the initial scout squad. Both players going for the same builds we saw last game, so we'll have to see who plays it better this time. Stevebud trying to find a spot for his warboss to hang out, but couldn't quite find the sweet spot behind that pillar.
Yeah, unfortunately his warboss is isolated. As good as I think the warboss is, having him isolated is usually not a good situation, since he won't have that much of an impact when he's just chasing them around with that default chain axe.
And that was a good retreat. He recognized that the Sluggas are just going to lose the Apothecary in the attacks. You really need to bring your whole force to bear to bring down that initial threat, because the attacks are going to have way more health than you think, because they're going to get the heal from the Apothecary. And then, you know, the Apothecary himself does reasonable melee damage in the early game before everything starts getting upgraded.
And I think especially once the Assault Space Marines with the heal can practically counter some of their counters, disrupting the Slugga boys and then getting the heal, I think that might be a slight win for the Assault Space Marines. If not in Tier 1, then definitely in Tier 2 with Merciless Strike ready.
Oh, without question, certainly.
So, map control is definitely in favor of Riku.
Yep, that map is pretty blue. And not going for the Flamers, doesn't have either of his scout shotguns yet, waiting to see what Stevebud goes for his next squad. I actually wouldn't be surprised to maybe see Angry Bits Cyborg Stomp. Like, if he can disrupt a little more with that Warboss and force Riku to focus down that Warboss, then that'll allow a lot more time for his Slugga boys if he chooses to get Storm Boys, his Storm Boys. So it's not a bad thing to consider gearing up your Warboss, because without any gear, there's not nearly as much reason for the Space Marines to try to focus down. Wow, an early model loss there right before the heal. That was very fortunate for Stevebud. Forced Riku to fall back. Looks like the Apothecary is going to stick around, try to get a couple more Sluggas, but then thinks twice about it, being heavily outnumbered.
So that was well managed by Stevebud this time. We saw this time he did use aiming what's that to allow his Slugga boys to get in, and took out one of those tack models before Riku could get the heal. But Riku spent nothing on power on his initial units, so he could get those Assault Space Marines out. He also has shotguns. I don't know if I think he got that after he started making the Assault Space Marine purchase.
Yeah, he does have the one squad with shotguns. Out of reaches, though, allowing Stevebud a little easier access to the power farms. The gen farms are a bit closer together than they are, and of course Calderas Refinery. And of course, the other thing to think about in this map is always that those retreat paths are so very dangerous. Oh, it looks like the Warboss does have the Bang Bang Hammer. And, man, that thing really allows him to beat up Space Marine and assault Space Marine. So it looks like he may, in fact, be doing just what I mentioned, trying to make that Warboss a little threat so he can draw some more fire. The Assault Marines waste their second jump, but they're going to be in dire straits right now if they're not careful.
I mean,
oh, wow.
The Apothecary should have a heal ready. Does get the heal, but they're still in trouble.
And the Apothecary is getting focused down. He's going to have to fall back. The Warboss still has plenty of health. And Storm Boys are on the field. They need to get it up here to reinforce and help out with the rest of the Orc squads. Those assaults are going to need to get out of there. One more hit. Yeah, one of them goes down. Warboss might get another swing. Looks like now's the time to retreat, but they do stay on the field.
Scouts here. Go ahead.
Those Storm Boys need to get up top. Those Scouts don't have a knockback. The Tactical Marines are up there. He does, of course, need to focus on his VPs, but those Storm Boys could go up, get the Capit, so even VPs right now, nothing was bleeding off, so he could have sent those Storm Boys up. I feel like the key to Orcs right now dealing with Space Marines is that Orc aggression, that kind of, you know, notorious just big pushes, never relenting. The Green Tide, of course.
Especially with that Warboss. And yeah, with some more War Gears, that Warboss could be pretty threatening. I think Angry Bits would be good. I think the Cyborg implants might actually be better just for giving the Warboss a little more health than for the actual ability.
Well, there's always the, I feel like the usual dual strike there, the charge in and then the stomp. But yeah, that extra health's important. I mean, really make your enemy, you know, that's really the name of this game, is have many different threats, make your enemy have to hesitate on what he wants to take out first. If you've got melee, you've got jump squads, you've got a Warboss that's going to come in with tons of health and just constantly be taking huge chunks off of your army. You know, all that kind of stuff. But it looks like we're going to have another engagement right here. He just grabs a scout right off the bat, punches him with the blunt side of that hammer, throws him aside, and everything's just bashing each other here in this big brouhaha in the center.
Now, I thought Riku was going to shotgun blast the Warboss as soon as the Warboss came in, but instead he backed up. And I think maybe he did that because he was anticipating the Storm Boys to jump later. Maybe Stevebud was trying to actually bait out the shotgun blast with his Warboss. At least that's how I read it.
And man, if I were to say, this looks like it might be heading a little more in favor of Stevebud. Riku just retreated, and there's two big shooter squads getting ready to move in on the power farm. That power farm's just going to melt under that kind of firepower. Both players heading into Tier 2, and this game might be more of a show for us coming up shortly.
And Orcs have a lot of power to bash generators, just with having pretty high damage on all of their units. 2 generators down. I don't know if he's going to be able to get a third one, but it's still without any kind of flamer. Actually, I think he might get that third one.
Yeah, the assault jump is probably going to come maybe just in the nick of time. Let's see if it lands. It does! And he instantly hits the retreat. That last generator is going to stand, so 200 rec down and a couple generators. Riku does look like he's doing all right on requisition, but he's going into Tier 2. May not want to spend on those generators because he's probably going to want to get that Razorback, that Librarian, those upgrades, what have you, out here pretty quickly. Stevebud doesn't have any resources, so it looks like he spent it on something as well. So it'll be interesting to see what he's got going.
Storm Boys jump in by themselves to, I guess, stall out the Tactical Marines to prevent them from bashing. I guess that buys Stevebud time to get the rest of his units out, while still taking minimal, like, gen farm losses.
Oh, there we go. This time we've got the war truck coming. Good to see that.
Alright, competing transports.
We have destroyed that which offended the Emperor.
But of course, you're going to have to be very careful with that war truck. Orcs do armor their war truck with paper mache, I believe, so it only takes about 1 tactical marine rocket to blow that thing right off the map.
Yeah, and one of the things I think about Space Marines is that they are one of the best races in the position for upgrading an existing army roster to have AV with the missile launcher and the melted bomb. Whereas I think a lot of other races, they generally have to focus more on getting out entirely new units.
Wow, and this is, I mean, this is again looking like a good engagement for Stevebud. He took out one of those Assault Space Marine models, forced off the Apothecary, and as it stands right now, Stevebud's on-the-field forces are gonna easily push off Dark Riku's. It's really gonna come down, I think, to which of these transports might be going down first. Of course, the Razorback's just gonna hang out and start trying to bleed off orcs. Stevebud needs to get an answer out for that as soon as he can. Of course, Dark Riku also has to respond in kind to the War Truck, but for the time being, it looks like there goes the decap and the shooters have to fall back.
I think, yeah, I just think Riku's answers that he can get very soon are going to be a little better than the ones that Stevebud could get. Getting a missile launcher, getting melta-bombs, whereas Stevebud, if he wants some kind of ranged AV, he's going to have to pay for tank busters or a beamy Luda, and that's an entirely new unit, so going to be more expensive than an upgrade. Steve's upgrades choices are mostly melee choices, so it'll be a little harder to catch a fast vehicle like the Razorback.
The Razorback looks like it's trying to path block that truck from getting over to the tanks, but the Storm Boys managed to push him off easily, so we're having a little battle here between the two transports. Tank Busters coming out onto the field.
See the Tank Busters. We're also seeing some of those upgrade responses where we have the Storm Boy knob, does heavy melee. I also have the Melta Bomb on the Assault Space Marines. No missile launcher though. So right now, Dark Riku doesn't really have enough to take out the War Truck quite yet.
But that, honestly, that Melta Bomb on its own is enough to intimidate the Orc player to pull that truck back. Like, as soon as he spots that little icon upon the Assault Space Marines, he's going to be a lot less aggressive with that truck. There's, I think Codex made the post I was reading a long time ago, but there's a lot to be said for implied threat in this game. Like,
oh yeah, I think a lot of people don't think about that, but I mean, just the fact that you have AV is going to change like how your opponent is going to use their vehicle.
War Truck might be going for the suicide drop here.
Oh, and now there is a missile tack. So unless those tacks get tied up, that could be a dead War Truck. Oh, but the tacks actually retreat. I think if they had just stayed in a little bit longer, got one missile shot off, they would have taken out the War Truck.
Assault Sarge goes down. That's a big loss, and the remaining Assault Squad is very low on health, but with all three models. Luckily, the Apothecary is on the field, so he'll be able to deal with that. 307 to 435. Stevebud doing pretty solid in these past engagements, but looking a little behind as far as VPs go. But if he can shut down the Space Marine tech at this point in the game, I mean, he's just going to be miles ahead of Dark Riku. Riku really needed to break that truck right there. I mean, if nothing else, it would have forced Stevebud to consider pulling off the field with those injured squads, but now he knows he can just stay out there, keep reinforcing off that War Truck, and now he's going to have the center of the map, the center VP.
Stevebud's got a huge army. He almost has enough to go to tier 3.
I mean, it's by no means over, but Riku's going to have to play these engagements really carefully, and it looks like he's being just a bit too brazen with those Assault Space Marines. Oh, no. Here comes another Tank Buster barrage.
Assault Space Marines.
Oh man, if those go down, it's going to be it. But even so, there's two heavy melee squads moving in on the Apothecary. And it's going to get away.
One member gets out of there.
Still
but,
crazy expensive. Without a power farm, every power loss matters, and those Assault Space Marines are 8 apiece to reinforce.
It's going to keep Riku in tier 2 for a while, possibly for as long as this game will go. And then Stevebud, meanwhile, already starting tier 3.
I mean, it certainly takes a lot of power investment just to cancel that truck. That truck is so relatively cheap compared to the rocket launcher and the Meltas that Riku has to invest to really force it off the field.
Storm Boy is retreating, very interestingly. I guess they want to actually restore their health instead of just pay for
it's possible he has those on the same number as the Slugga Boys. I think they retreated at the same time. He may have had a small micro oversight there.
But I mean, he is low on resources, so it would be a lot to reinforce those Storm Boys.
All things considered, though, Riku's doing a great job of keeping that map control. He's still got the VP advantage, so he's got time to bring this back. Trying to keep the pressure on that War Truck. Not sure why he jumped the Assault Marines in there. Wow, and it does go down.
I thought it was just, I thought it would need a follow-up from the rocket miss attack. I don't know if I just missed it. It looked like it was not going to go down just from the Melt-A-Bomb.
The Melt-A-Bomb may have gotten a rear armor hit. I do believe the positioning on where the Melta hits actually does matter.
Alright. So Riku's still in this. He puts up a new generator farm. He is in Tier 2, though. He's staying in Tier 2, at least for now. But soon we could have just about anything come out of Stevebud, whether it's Knobs, a looted tank. Either one of those, I think, would do fairly well against Riku.
Riku has to be really careful not to bleed at all anymore at this point in the game. He's going to need to play all of these engagements very carefully. I mean, everything that Stevebud has such huge damage output potential. I mean, that War Boss with the trophy rack and that Bang Bang Hammer is pretty nasty on its own. You got those 2 fully upgraded Shooter Boy squads. And then you've got the 2 melee squads with Knobs, and I'm sure those guys, yeah, are level 2, and, oh, the Storm Boys are actually only level 1. Here comes a nice Tank Buster barrage.
And Riku...
Ooh, again, just sitting under it. If those Tank Busters were there for a follow-up strike, that would have been it for that Razorback. But there is a looted tank coming out here shortly, and that's going to pose a much larger threat to the entire army along with that Razorback, so... We'll see how this goes. Of course, with the bases being so close together, that's another thing about outer reaches, is that tank, as soon as it comes out, it can pretty much just hop right over to Riku's natural VP and where he's holding up there with that Razorback.
Hostiles. The task unfinished is a prayer unanswered.
Razorback has been idling for a little while.
Yeah, and Stevebud just moving out with this giant pile of orcs. He needs to get his War Boss in there. I mean, he doesn't have his truck, so this would be the perfect engagement for a call to boys. And he could probably close out this game if he plays it right. This War Boss is now on the field. Tank Buster Barrage looks like it's going to miss outright, but the looted tank is here. It's going to start focusing down that Razorback most likely. Angels of Death! Oh my gosh, and I don't even know who's going to win this fight. It's just chaotic in the middle here. Looks like Riku just goes ahead, reflexively retreats both the squads at the sight of that looted tank. Razorback is going to get out of there, I think. But even with that Angels of Death, wow, look at the damage those Assault Marines took. Of course, in the Elite mod, it no longer makes your Marines invulnerable, but it does give some a really high damage reduction on all of your forces.
I think there were some really interesting things about that engagement. I saw the Angels of Death, and I immediately thought the Razorback isn't affected by that, so you should go for the Razorback. But then he still had the Scouts repairing, so it was going to be a lot harder to force the Scouts off since they were affected by Angels of Death.
I mean, I was kind of surprised that he popped Angels of Death and then retreated. I mean, it was obviously the right choice at the time, but I think maybe the Angels of Death was a bit premature. It really didn't pay off there, and I think it was just kind of some wasted red, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I think Riku maybe sees that he's going to be in Tier 2 for a little while, and he's just deciding that he wants to use the red to use everything he has to fight against Stevebud at this point. And he's choosing to stick with he gets a Tier 2 purchase, has some Devastators, probably going to make it a las cannon to deal with the tank, the looted tank.
Understood.
Yeah, he's definitely going to need that. That looted tank can really, you know, just that added DPS right now against everything that's on the field is really going to hurt. The Razorback's been what's keeping him in the game so far, and for the time being, that looted tank is just going to push it off completely. I like the little pokes and prods he's doing with the Razorback, trying to make sure those Storm Boys, trying to make sure those Orc squads are low health at the start of these engagements. And wow, Riku's actually is going to make it into Tier 3 this game, but is he going to have enough power to hang on and you know, get something big Tier 3 out on the field? He's been doing an amazing job, like I said so far, keeping the map control. He's constantly got one of his scout squads on the rear side, capping that natural VP in front of Stevebud, so keeping the bleed off as long as he can. He's actually still up in VPs despite losing these recent engagements pretty heavily.
Even has a scout squad going down to the bottom just to get that power, keeping up with the map control. Now, Stevebud is doing very well on resources, but he's pop capped, so can't get a knob squad out or anything unless he loses a unit. Choosing to go for upgrades. He's getting the reinforced plating on the looted tank.
And jumps in under suppression right there. Devastator not upgraded with the las. It looks like he's just using that for suppression. He feels like maybe he has enough to deal with the looted tank with his 2 AV options as on the field. I think suppression is super important against Orc, especially in this stage of the game. Another rocket goes down, the Melt is in there, the Assault Space Marines don't have a jump. That Warboss
might get wiped there. Use your Choppa is going to take out the Assault Space Marines.
Oh my gosh, those Assault Space Marines. Oh no,
yes.
Huge loss. Wow.
Riku will call it GG at this point or keep playing. Oh, Devastators go down too.
Oh my gosh, that's going to be it, I think. This match was so close and so good. But Dark Riku just a little beside himself right now. Lost 2 major squads, lost scouts as well.
The Sluggo Boys finish off the Razorback.
Wow.
I thought it was so funny just seeing the Sluggo Boys chase after the Razorback, and then they actually killed it.
Wow, I actually think I have some sort of some sort of weird sound bug. All I'm hearing right now is the sound of the looted tank. My Dawn of War 2 is acting up a bit. Oh, and did the game just end? What happened?
Yes, the game ended.
Okay, there we go. Oh my gosh, and all my sound just activated. And there goes the concede. Dark Riku down to 2 squads. And,
so that was a very good game. Very well played by Stevebud. Adapting, trying different things.
Going to the ace match, though. That's pretty exciting. I mean, I knew Stevebud's... I had mentioned earlier that Stevebud's Warboss has been giving Dark Riku a little bit of a headache here. I do think Outer Reaches, that smaller map, is definitely more advantageous. There's lots of nooks and crannies for the Orcs to hide around and really force Dark Riku's hand. But wow, let's take a look at the scoreboard here. No commander losses. But looking at the units lost to units killed tab, I mean, it's 34 to 39, but you gotta remember each of those units lost on Riku's side is a super expensive Space Marine, and even the scouts cost more than Shootaboys and Sluggas.
Yeah, it's actually, like, if anything, I feel like not in proportion to what it should be with, basically, I feel like, given how much Space Marines should generally lose, and especially with the Apothecary, that's